What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo's here on Bob Weichel. Early on a Friday morning following the Phillies Game 4 victory over the Atlanta Braves. And I don't know about you, but we're feeling it over here this morning a little bit, Anthony. We were talking before the show, everybody listening here, and I just asked Anthony, I said, are you a coffee guy? He said, not really. And then I asked him, do you have a cocaine habit? Because I've no idea. The alarm went off this morning, and I'm like, oh man, we're gonna do this show for the people, but my God, hurting a little bit right now.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I hit snooze a couple times, like in frustration this morning. But that, hey, we do it because the people want to hear our opinions and want to hear our takes on this team. And we've been pretty spot on with this team, Bob. So I think
I don't know. I feel like I predicted this series. I feel like I've been spot on up until this series. I feel like I predicted this series incorrectly about 8 times as it went along here. So
we look, our initial predictions were Braves in 5. That was our initial predictions, and we both said we're wrong. But if you go back and listen to that whole that episode when we talked about it, we also said that this is the one team that can beat Atlanta, and there is a path to it. And we talked about that path how many times leading up to before they even got into the playoffs. Like not even like before the Marlins was over, before the playoffs even happened, we talked about the path that the Phillies had to beating the Braves, and man, they took it. They might have been a couple diversions along the way that we didn't see coming, and a lot of that had to do with how the bullpen was deployed. But they took that path and they eviscerated Atlanta. Bob, Braves only scored 8 runs in 4 games. Like, the Phillies figured them out, and I don't know when it happened, where it happened. If there was some kind of aha moment in preparation for the series, or if they knew all along, but they figured out this historic, in quotes, Braves offense, and pretty much beat them to a pulp. If it wasn't for one stupid little late rally in the second game, they should have swept them.
Yeah, it was thorough domination. I mean, there's just really no other way to say it. You think about the Eagles Super Bowl run back in 2017, and you had that game against the Falcons at home, and you had a couple balls bounce your way. Like, you had to kind of grind it out. Like, this series was just they pummeled this Braves team. Like, there was no fluke here. There was no, hey, we took down the better team, but we needed an act of God to do it. I mean, the Phillies destroyed this Braves team this week. They truly did in all facets of the game. I thought they were outmanaged. I thought that they were certainly out hit. I thought they were outpitched. From an energy and focus and concentration standpoint, I thought that it was no contest. You saw what happened last night, a couple of the tweets as the game started to progress. Spencer Strider wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. He gives up 3 runs in 5 2/3 innings, but you saw his frustration start to boil over at the end of the game when he was yelling into his glove. And I mean, listen, that's to be expected. I don't think that that's anything outside the typical realm of what you would anticipate for a guy who didn't really deliver the way he wanted to. But then you see Orlando Arcia. It was very clear that the Phillies fans had gotten to him. I mean, he looked like an absolute clown in the middle of the game in the dugout, yapping at the fans. Ronald Acuna Jr. doesn't talk to the media after the game last night. Like, it was very clear that the Phillies not only just destroyed that team on the field, but they had just wiped them emotionally clean as well. I mean, it was just a dominant effort all week, really, all week. And this was the correct result. We can talk about the schedule. We can talk about the format, disadvantages, advantages. Bottom line for me is that you have a great offense. It didn't perform. You matched up Spencer Strider, your boy, the big bad Spencer Strider, 2 times against Ranger Suarez, the Phillies' number 3 starter, and you couldn't beat him. And that's on you, Atlanta. And, Phillies have to feel great about what they've got going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I don't know, Bob, if we talk about the things that we've said on this show before many times. And we've said that this series would determine, at one point we said it was just going to be determining who goes to the World Series. But I think it was 2 weeks ago or we do so many episodes now during the playoffs. It's hard to remember exactly when. but we said that whoever wins this series will win the World Series. I'm there. Like, I didn't think that last year. I mean, when they upset the Braves, we were like, wow, that was a pleasant surprise. And then they went ahead and, well, we liked them against the Padres. Okay, great. And in the World Series, we didn't, we took Houston because we kind of knew Houston was the best team. I'm looking at it now, and I know Houston's still possibly in the way. You got to get through the Diamondbacks first. I'm not looking past them. You might see Houston. You might see Texas. Both of those teams very good. Both those teams big money, veteran-laden teams. I don't care. I think that there's something about this Phillies team right now that you see and you feel and like this is their year. They would need some kind of complete loss of mojo or major injury or something to derail it. And any of that stuff can still happen. But I mean, I look at it and say they're 8 wins away. They're going to get those 8 wins.
Well, I mean, the one thing you do have to worry about is that they have 3 days off. And I mean, you can't play baseball after you have a few days off. I mean, that's one thing I definitely learned this week. So listen, Phillies are actually a -162 favorite in game 1. I assume that it'll be, I guess, I mean, both teams can reset their rotations the way that they want to. I would assume that it's going to be Galen Wheeler in game 1. Pitcher Eustace's own Zach Gallen. Can't wait for that storyline to be jammed down our throat now that everybody's paying attention.
Well, they have 2 Philly guys there, Christian Walker, Norristown, right?
Well, yeah.
So.
And then for the series, though, Phillies are -170 favorite. Right now, World Series odds. Astros do have the best odds to win the World Series. It's +185 at DraftKings, Phillies +210. And while I do not think that the Astros are better than the Phillies this time around, and I agree with the point that you just made that there's something about this team, they're going to do it. I agree with that. I get why the Astros would be favored in this scenario. You're talking about a team that just happens to be in the spot every year, and they're the defending champions, so I think you have to kind of give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of setting the odds. So talking about this game last night, and there's so much to unpack about the entire series and what we liked and maybe some things that might concern you moving forward. I don't really think there's many at the moment. In fact, some of the things that I thought were somewhat frustrating about this NLDS series, I sort of expect to kind of see corrected next week. But I don't know how you don't start with Nick Castellanos. It's so funny if you go back and if you've been listening to the show throughout the course of the year, we've talked about him so much. Can he bounce back from 22? Where's that guy that we thought this team had signed from an offensive standpoint? Where has he been? And he gets off to a good start. The batting average is good, but the power's not there. He's not making like an extra base hit impact. And as the season went along, you started to look up and say, like, okay, he's around 30 home runs. He's hitting about 275, 280 for this team. He doesn't walk, but okay, that's okay. Like the extra base hits, they were there this season. But it was always like a hot, cold thing, like, well, if you just get him in that right stretch, he's dangerous. But, man, when it's not going well, it's not going well. Well, I'll tell you what. He might just be in one of those stretches right now. Maybe it's that. But I thought what we saw this week was just consistent excellence. Like, I know we're only talking about these past 3 games, really. But everything. There was no dinks and dunks. There was no broken bat base hits. There was no 1 home run and 5 strikeouts. It's not like he made a key contribution, but then was otherwise quiet. It was every time he stepped into the batter's box, he was an absolute menace. Righty, left, it did not matter. I mean, you're talking about for the first time ever, a Major League Baseball player hitting multiple home runs in back-to-back postseason games, which, I don't know, did you see the on-field exchange on TBS after the game with Matt Weiner?
Absolutely tremendous. Is there a question in there?
Vintage Nick Castellanos, man. But you have that part of the equation. I said to you last night, the one thing that I'm looking at that I'm just like, this is kind of nerdy, but like the last 3 games, I should say, he put 10 balls in play with exit velos over 95 miles per hour. 7 of them are over 100 miles per hour. He literally mashed everything that he saw for 3 consecutive games. And they were the most important 3 games of the entire season. It was an unbelievable performance by that guy.
He slugged over 1,000 in that series. Not OPS. His slugging was over 1,000. His OPS was 1,400, I think it was, right? Which is absurd. He slugged over 1,000 against the Braves.
Dude, he hit more home runs against the Braves in this series than the Braves hit as a team. They're
Yeah,
historic offense, man. I can't wait to not hear that anymore,
I
right?
know.
Like, so I mean, he was just he truly took the game over, and it's also the context of how it happened. It's not like he hit 2 home runs in situations where the game was well out of reach, or hey, that's cool, great job. It's more of like a pile on. I know his one was in game 3, but the first one ties the game up. It puts all the energy back into the stadium early. Same deal last night. Phillies fall behind. You're kind of like, I thought the crowd brought it from start to finish. Like, I didn't think that. Whereas in game 3, I do think that they were kind of on their hands a little bit early on. And it took that Phillies explosion to kind of get them rolling. That crowd last night from 7:30 p.m. onward, from the time that Spencer Strider walked out to the bullpen until the time that Matt Strahm, which we'll get to, by the way, in a few minutes, through the last pitch of the game, that crowd was on fire. But again, it was Castellanos that kind of got things rolling with that first home run. We'll talk about Harper for 50 years, and we'll talk about all of these different guys. But what Nick Castellanos did this week is maybe up there with the most impressive performances of any of them over the past 2 postseasons.
100%, Bob. And not only that, I mean, the thing that, and I remember leaning over to you last night, and after he hits the first home run, he goes out to the field, and he's acknowledging the fans in right field. He after playing catch, he identifies a certain fan out there that he wants to get the ball to. He's applauding the fans as they applaud him. He's tipping his cap and stuff like that. And I'm saying to myself, where did this come from? Like, not the player, right? Not the really good offensive player. We've seen that in his career. That's why he signed the contract that he signed to come to Philadelphia. But to really become like the mayor out there, like, he's really, and in a lot of ways you call him a philosopher, right? But he's become one of those guys who is going to be beloved here for the rest of his life. Like, just this season alone, and he's a must hear interview, not because he's going to give you like some fantastic soundbite, although he's had a few, but because he's just the personality that he is. And how his humor is like a dry humor that he's like trying to keep you off guard with how he responds to things, and like it's a must listen to. And I'm like, I never would have thought this from this guy. Like, this was the biggest heel turn in the history of sports. Like, and in a good way, in a positive way. I guess I say heel turn, but go in a positive direction. It's utterly fascinating, but I'm all in for it because I think it's just great.
Yeah, he is. I feel like somebody that we talk about holding players and holding teams accountable. I feel like as a player, he's like, I'm going to hold these guys accountable. Like, do not come to me with some stupid ass question. Do not come to me with some fluff. Like, you better know your stuff if you're going to ask me a question. And he's never been disrespectful, but he always just makes you, I better get this one right. There's no stick a microphone in his face and say, talk about. There's none of that. You hit 2 home runs. Can you talk about it? What was going through your head? Like, you better frame that question correctly and have some substance behind it if you're going to ask him one.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no doubt about that.
It's been great. As media members, maybe we see it a little bit more, but I mean, look, the fans are really, really taking on to him, right? But we tend to, as media people, we tend to flock to guys who do push us, who do challenge us a little bit, because it's almost like, well, what's he going to say next? How's this going to work? How far can we push it by asking him his questions in a certain way? It's really, really cool. And, it's great to see. And it's part of what makes this Phillies team tick. And I want to get into that a little bit too, because I ended up having a very long conversation, as you know, last night with John Middleton.
Yeah, I thought he was bringing you in on the ownership agreement. I thought maybe I'd carve out a piece for you.
I was the last person in the locker room with him, and Kevin Gregg, the PR guy, is like kind of standing there, and he's, to his credit, didn't try and stop John, didn't try and prevent me from asking questions, but you could tell, like, it was like, okay, we need to wrap this up. They need to get in here, right? We need to get the cleaning crew in here and everything else. Like, it was just me and Middleton, and we talked a lot about like what makes this team what it is. And John gave some great answers, which we'll talk about. But I know you have specifics you want to get into, but it was really, really cool.
Yeah, well, whenever you see the opportunity to kind of weave back into that, go right ahead.
Yeah.
You know, again, I think we are focusing on the offense, the player performances from the lineup side of things, but it's easy to kind of just gloss right over the fact that Ranger Suarez gave you 5 innings of 1-run baseball again last night, and he seems to have figured something out about this Atlanta lineup. And if I am incorrect here with my math, I apologize, but I'm fairly certain this is correct. His last 7 starts against the Braves, he's thrown a combined 35 innings. He's actually put on a decent amount of base runners. He's given up 4 earned runs, though. I mean, he has, for the better part of almost 2 years now, really found a way to keep this Atlanta lineup in check. And when you consider the damage that this Braves lineup does against left-handed pitching, it makes what he did this series, especially, all that more amazing. It's not that he pitched deep into games. It's, you know, he didn't go 21 outs. But he gave the Phillies exactly what they needed. And last night, you know, it wasn't a matter of we were super aggressive and got him out of the game early and we found a way to beat Spencer Strider. I mean, he recorded 2 less outs or 2 fewer outs than Spencer Strider last night. He matched him. He outpitched Spencer Strider last night. We keep talking about the slow heartbeat stuff. I think you sometimes roll your eyes when things get said again and again and again. But something like this gets said again and again and again because it's true. He just doesn't seem to, the moment just does not seem to impact him. In fact, it seems like he thrives off of it.
Yeah, he does. And deserves a lot of credit because he went up against some guys who kill lefties and was really good against them. I mean, just really, really, he went through the lineup twice last night, gave up just the 1 run and the home run, solo homer by Riley that just cleared the left field wall in the corner, down the left field line. But other than that, I mean, that was really like the only major blemish. Everything else, you know, yeah, he gave up some hits and whatever, but he found his way out. He just pitched. He pitched like a champ again. He did it a lot last year, right? But this was a little bit different, Bob. I mean, what they did, and you and I had a nice conversation with Caleb Cotham after the game last night, kind of talking about pitching in general. And I don't want to be, I would be remiss if I didn't reiterate what he said. And when he talked about how important JT Realmuto was to this entire series in preparing for these hitters and calling, you know, the way he talked about JT calling the games in this series, just how good of a job he did with all the pitchers. And it's hard to disagree with him when you look at how they limited the Braves. Ronald Acuna had 2 hits in game 3, and that's it in a 4-game series. Didn't do anything. Matt Olson didn't have an RBI. Matt Olson had 130 RBIs this year, something along those lines, some ridiculous number. 54 home runs. Did not have 1 RBI in the series. They shut down the big bats of the Braves. I mean, you got 2 home runs to Riley, 1 home run to Travis d'Arnaud, and 1 run scored on an error by Trey Turner. I mean, that's it. Really, I mean, the other stuff was, you know, there was a run scored late in game 3. It was 10-1 at that point, and they got another run. Okay, great. I mean, but we're talking about when the games were competitive. That's all they gave up in 4 games. It's hard to knock them when, you know, we're sitting there questioning bullpen decisions. We're sitting there wondering why you're pulling Ranger Suarez in game 2 or game 1 when they pulled him. This, that, and the other. But everything that they did, they were freaking Midas, man. They touched it and it turned to gold. Yeah. And that was, you got to give credit when it's due. And they had a plan that worked to perfection against the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah, they sure did. And just to kind of put a bow on that thought, I mean, the Braves here in the regular season in 871 team OPS against left-handed pitching. The next best team against lefties this season was the Houston Astros with an 809 OPS. It's not just that Atlanta was the best team. It's that they were far and away the best team against left-handed pitching. And not only does Ranger Suarez go out and pitch 5 innings of 1-run baseball, but it's Matt Strahm in the 9th that closes the door on it. And that's, I think, a perfect segue from what you were just saying, which is everything that this team touched from a strategical standpoint in this series, it did turn to gold. I mean, listen, I know that they got Hoffman late. I know that you know, you could have criticized Some people did. We did not. I don't get this. The criticism of leaving Zach Wheeler in the 7th inning of game 2, I think that was nonsense. To me, that kind of goes back to something I've said on this show throughout the years, which is when things go wrong, people want to just point to the coach, point to the manager. It's just the easiest thing to kind of default to. And sometimes those criticisms are warranted. Go back to game 6 of the World Series last year. They took out Zach Wheeler, I thought, prematurely in that game. It burned them. I think that in that moment, you could really criticize what you were watching. This series, though, they did things where we looked at one another and like, I don't get this. I mean, you're a big bullpen guy. Like, you love lineup construction. You love like the flow of the bullpen. I'm trying to write a 1,300-word story, and you're trying to guess the next move in the bullpen. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. Just get the outs. Let's go. You know what I mean? Like, because I'm like, I'm trying to get this thing published, and you're doing what you do, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. Like Strahm, Alvarado, who gives a shit? Just get them out. You know?
Yeah.
So, but it was crazy. I mean, for the life of me, if you said, here you go, here's a lead going into the late innings, into the 6th inning and behind, we're going to give you Sir Anthony Dominguez to Jose Alvarado in the 6th with an up down in between to who was it after that?
Kimbrel.
Kimbrel, right? With an up down in between and an old time hold your breath moment against Ronald Acuna. And he comes back out and he gets 2 more outs in the following inning to Gregory Soto, to Matt Strahm. I mean,
and it was an up down for Soto too. They did up down for 3 guys.
Things that these guys don't do. Soto's not a big up down guy. Kimbrel's certainly not a big up down guy. And Kimbrel hadn't pitched in the 7th inning or earlier since May 1st.
Yeah.
You know, he had one garbage time appearance at the end of September. I guess it was the Mets, where he came in the 7th inning. Other than that, Craig Kimbrel didn't sniff the 7th inning at all this season. They were just, and you know, Caleb Cotham said after the game, like, we tried to, you know, prepare these guys and put them in situations that, you know, at some point give them the experience to know, hey, I can do this. But like, if we're being honest, there were some things that were well outside the comfort zone, I would think, for some of these guys last night. But credit to them, they performed.
Yeah, and no, Rob Thompson answered the question when he was asked about how these guys were deployed and why go to Alvarado when he went to him, and Kimbrel in the 7th, why go to them early? And he said, listen, he said that's where their best guys were coming up in their lineup. We wanted our best guys on their best guys at a time when the game was in the balance, and we'd figure out the rest later. And you asked Caleb about this. You said, I mean, was this the plan, like, coming in? And he kind of laughed and said, you know, we had multiple plans. Well, we thought multiple, you know, possibilities. If this happens, and then this. If this happens, and then that. But I think that they were kind of surprised, even themselves, that they're like, all right, well, we're going to Matt Strahm to close out the division series, to get the save in the division series. And I asked Strahm about it during the celebration. It was loud as hell. It's kind of hard to hear, but I got the answer from him. Went to the question. It was just like
I was a foot behind you, and I might as well have been in Pittsburgh. It
was that loud. Yeah, you couldn't hear a thing. And I asked, I said, could you ever have imagined when you're starting games for this team in April, because there's no starters, there's no pitching staff of any thought. I mean, Suarez was out, and they didn't have a number 5 starter. I mean, you started the season with Matt Strahm and Bailey Falter in this rotation. Okay, did you ever think then, yeah, I'm going to be called on to shut out the Atlanta Braves in the final game of the division series? Like, and he's like, no, but this is all you dream about. He says, I can't tell you how many times I was pitching to my brother as a kid where it was 3-2 count, bottom of the 9th in the World Series. And that was me on the mound. He says, it's all I used to dream about, all I used to think about. And here I am called into that moment, kind of unexpectedly. He says, yeah, we know that there are certain pockets in the lineup that we're geared toward, but we don't know until that phone rings, like, whose turn it is. And it wasn't until, you know, we got that call early in the 9th for me to get up and go. And it's like, all right, he said, I knew it was either me or Hoffman in that point. And he says, and I don't know for certain, but I expect that if Acuna got up and Acuna was on deck, that Hoffman was going to come in for Acuna. So he knew it was probably a 3-batter setup for him. and dude went out and got the 3 outs.
Yeah, truly amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, 'cause, you know, it's easy to say it now and be like, wow, it was all great. But I mean, Gregory Soto put them in a very difficult spot in the 9th inning, runners at the corners, nobody out. And you're thinking, okay, you know, this is the Braves team that we saw this in game 2. You're winning the game. You should win the game. And then they're at all times one swing away from being able to undo everything. And you know, for him to be able to come in and get those 3 outs was truly amazing. And a good moment after the game, after the first burst of celebration, I guess we'll say. Dave Dombrowski was getting ready to talk to reporters outside of the clubhouse there. You were in that scrum with John Middleton, and Dombrowski was about 10 feet away with another group of reporters, and he actually stopped. Strom, I guess, had excused himself or was coming back into the clubhouse. I don't know, but he too was outside in that hallway tunnel area. And Dombrowski was like, hold on, guys. And he went over to Strom, gave him a big hug, and said, like, dude, like, you know, I'll paraphrase, but like, you were unbelievable. Like, you're the man. And, you know, and Strom's like, this is why I wanted to come here. And I mean, it was a cool moment. And one of the things, because, you know, like, I always focus on like what happens next. I don't know that the Phillies are going to necessarily want to repeat that exact path through 27 outs again. And I don't think they will. But when you get deeper into a bullpen, when you start to rely on more than just the same 2 or 3 guys, like, you talk about like the feel of the clubhouse. And if they went out and threw shutout, complete game, I think everybody would have been just as happy. Everyone would have celebrated it the same. But when you involve that many people and you have that many different pitchers make that type of contribution, I think that does a lot from a confidence perspective. Like, if you're Matt Strom right now, you're like, okay, I just nailed down the final outs of the NLDS against the Atlanta Braves. Like, that's huge. Craig Kimbrell coming in and hey, listen, it was tough to watch in real time, but he's got to feel pretty good about himself right now. You know, it was a team effort. I guess this is all just a way of saying, like, pretty much everybody on that roster that played in that series in some capacity contributed to what happened. There were a couple guys that did struggle, and we'll get to that in a moment. But this was like look at the depth of this team. It was so many different guys that played a part in it.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's nice, and you don't even know you were doing this, but it was a nice segue back to my conversation with Middleton. Because I asked him a question. This is where one of the things we were having a long conversation about is that I said, you know, John, when you look at around baseball, and while the Phillies, Astros, and Rangers, who are 3 of the final 4 teams, are top 10 salary teams, there's a lot of high salary teams who didn't do well this year. I mean, the top 3 didn't make the playoffs at all, and the 4th, the Dodgers, got in but didn't win a game. And there are a couple others in the top 10 who just, you know, barely made an appearance or didn't make it. And I said, what is it about this Phillies team that when you have that kind of salary in this clubhouse that they succeed when others can't? And he credited Dombrowski, but he said he credited it from this perspective. He said, look, Dave's the leader of it. But when we go to sign a player or trade for a player, I can't even stress how much we put into learning about that player's character before we ever make that contract offer. And we call so many people and find out so much about them. And he talked about Bryce Harper being a big part of it, and how Harper knows that, you know, a certain player will fit into the culture and has that, is selfless and wants to just win and put team first. And will go to all lengths to be that bought into this kind of approach. And John said Dombrowski is fantastic at identifying that element, the character element. So, you know, he says, you know, you can put together all the great talents in the sport, but if they don't have the right character, if they don't mesh well together, if they don't buy into the concept of a team. And look, we talked about the failings of the San Diego Padres. As talented as they are, there was a disconnect in that clubhouse, right? And that's what kind of ultimately hurt them. You don't have that here because of the buy-in to the team first. You can look around baseball, and for the most part, there's nobody at the top of a leaderboard or close to the top of a leaderboard in any statistical category this year in baseball. A couple of small ones here and there, but for the most part, not there.
Right.
And yet, here they are for the second year in a row in the National League Championship Series and possibly to the World Series. That's indicative of the people and the team concept that is put together by this group of 26 players and put together at the top by Dave Dombrowski and all the executives of this team. It's a fascinating story. They do things unconventionally, but at the same time they do things in a way that kind of make you think this is outside the glitz and glamour of sports today. This is the way probably things were done back in the 1950s, for example, like as far as putting teams together, right? And it matters. It matters a lot. And that's when we talk about mojo and talk about vibes and things along those lines, this is all part of that.
There's no question about it. I mean, you think about what a baseball season really is, and you just go back and look at our run of shows and some of the things that we had to talk about and some of the series that this team played and just how long of a season it really is. Like, go back and open up the schedule and just look at some of the game by game. You'll say, like, I remember that game. Like, oh my God, that feels like it was a different season. And that's what I find so impressive about these guys. Like, the slow starts, overcoming it. Okay. But this year, it really, I think we said this, it was always about October. And if they knew once they got there that they could compete, there's one thing to believe that or think that about yourself. There's another thing to be said for actually doing it. Like, it's they get to this spot and like their ability to rise to the moment, their ability to play and listen, they should have beat the Marlins. We're not going to sit here and act like that was some monumental achievement or anything. But the fact is that they played good baseball in that series. They won the series when a lot of other teams that were better than them during the regular season didn't win those series, right? And then you get to this Brave series and like the ability to elevate beyond their talent and pretty much embarrass them. Like, and it was very similar to what happened last postseason. 4 games, win game 1, 3 and 4, lose 2, but like it was domination again. And like for this team to be able to, it's not even flipping the switch, it's to just elevate to a degree that you almost don't see the entire season and play their best at this point. It's just so impressive to watch. And you talk about vibes and how this is like all sort of come together. I don't know if there's conversations after games. I don't know if there's group text messages. I don't know if there's constant grinding in BP. I don't know I don't know how the hell these guys do this, but they do it. Like, I tweeted out sometime in the middle of April, the Phillies got down almost immediately, like 4.5 games behind the Braves. I said, listen, I know that they beat these guys last postseason, which was awesome. And like, credit to them for doing it. But like, this is not a sustainable way to get to where you want to go. Like, you can't just concede the division by 2 weeks every season. And maybe you can, maybe this team can. Like, I go ahead, win 88 games next year. I guess it doesn't even matter anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting because, and this will tell you a little bit, but before the game yesterday, Bryson Stott was one of the guys who was interviewed in the pregame media room, and he gets a question about hey, what's it like in the clubhouse right now? You guys all kind of talking and focused in, and hey, we just get that one more win and we beat the Braves, blah blah blah. Stott's like, yeah, we're not doing anything different than usual. We're in there shooting hoops. We're playing dominoes. We're playing ping pong, putting on the golfing on the putting green that they have in there, and like they're just being guys. They're just hanging out. They're whatever. And Rob talks about it all the time, saying this team knows how to have fun, but they also know how not to, push that too far. Either they know when it's time to work, but they're loose because they know how to have fun as well. And I think that tells you a lot about them, that they're not sitting there thinking, in silence and listening to their music and getting themselves pumped up for, you got to play the Braves, got to beat the Braves. They're out there just being guys, having a good time and saying, all right, it's time to go play baseball. And they enjoy it. And there's something to be said for that, Bob. It really is. It's an intangible that, you can never measure, but it's but it's unbelievably important.
What do you think the Braves' mentality was coming into this series? Do you think that they felt like there's just no way this can happen again? Or do you think that there was a genuine, we played these guys all season, we know how good they can be? Like, do you think that they were scared coming into this series? Or do you think, because listen, I don't think it mattered. Like, I don't think that their mindset truly mattered. I think the Phillies were going to just beat them anyway. But do you think that there was like a taking them lightly element? Do you think that there was a this just can't happen again element? Like, what do you think they were feeling coming in?
I don't think there was to take them lightly, but I think that the Braves came in with a lot of bravado, in the sense that this was our revenge tour. We blew through the regular season. We ran away with this division right away. The Phillies were never in it. We made sure of that. We won the division in their ballpark. Like, I feel like that it was a different kind of feel coming in. And I think, you know, then after they come back in game 2, they maybe get a surprise a little bit in game 1, but they come back and win the game in game 2. And it was almost like the way they were celebrating in their locker room. Of course, a lot was made of that, right? With the Arcia thing. But the way they were celebrating in their locker room, it was almost like that they felt, hey, guess what, guys? You know, they should have had us. They had us. They didn't, and they let us back. They should never have let us back. We're going to go up there. We're going to win this series now. And then they got into the environment. They got into the jungle, and it snowballed on them. It was an avalanche coming right at them, and they were like, "Oh shit, here we go again. This team's doing it again." And I think that the Phillies got in their heads once they got back up here to Philly, and it was just like, just to respond. I mean, look. They like to make pretend that they don't let this stuff bother them, right? And yet we walk into that clubhouse and Orion Kirkering's wearing an Attaboy Harper T-shirt, right? With a phrase on the back like he wasn't supposed to hear it, right? I mean, like those things.
T-shirt. How many of those do you think you're going to see next week?
All right, I mean, unbelievable, right? I even said yes, like we got to get that picture up. That's so good. And then, you know, then you can see the video. I don't know if you've seen it, but like you've seen the video when they're singing their songs and they start, you know, they're saying, you know, fuck the Bravos and whoever we play next and always the Mets.
Too,
like that's the kind of thing. Like they pay attention to all of this. There's a lot of chirping that doesn't get reported about. But they pay attention to every little thing and they use it to motivate them and they have fun doing it. And that's what makes them so perfect for this city. It just really does. It's next level stuff. And real quick, I want to, because I know we got to wrap this up here. I'm getting texts from Russ. I got to go do Snow the Goalie. Right?
It's hockey season. The whole city is dialed in on the Flyers.
Yeah, dialed in on the Flyers. I got to go talk about a game I watched not 1 second of. But I know we real quick want to do this because we'll do the full preview of the Diamondbacks on Monday prior to game 1. But there were 2 players, I think, that should have been a little bit of concern with how they've looked so far in the playoffs, and they're currently in the top half of the batting order. So I think that that's something that the Phillies are going to have to get right if they want to get 8 more wins and take this thing home.
Yeah, it's tough when 2 of your first 4 hitters really give you pretty much nothing. Kyle Schwarber, who I'm trying to take the optimistic look at this and say, like, we know what he is. We know that he can be a big game player. He's delivered on the big stage before. And you know that he can go through runs of games where he just doesn't look comfortable, and then he can just go off for 3 or 4 games. And you're hoping now, after 2 series where he did not make that typical Kyle Schwarber impact, that they've hung around long enough that he can get going. Because, you know, he just really, and I'm actually like just buying myself a moment here to get to it, but I'm looking at this, and he was in this series 2 for 17 against the Braves, and he's 4 for 25 this postseason now. And it's not like he's striking out a ton either. He's just kind of like a lot of weak contact, a lot of rolling over. He just hasn't made an impact. And then Alec Boehm looked completely overmatched last night, which is, you know, not a totally ridiculous thing to say against Spencer Strider, but that game could have gotten away from them last night. They had a lot of opportunities early on. They had at least 2 runners on base each of the first 3 innings. He had an opportunity, runners at first and third with 1 out, to drive in a run with a fly ball. He swung at a first pitch slider outside of the strike zone, popped out to second base. Like, Alec Boehm is really good in terms of his approach and knowing how to work an at bat, and he's great with runners in scoring position. He's a guy that you should feel good about in that type of situation, and he wasn't last night, and he too has not been particularly good this postseason. I believe he's 4 for 21 now. So they need those guys to get going, because while I believe that the Phillies are going to go to the World Series and I think they're going to win it, I just don't see a scenario where they can keep surviving that. Unless Nick Castellanos wants to hit 2 home runs per game, then I guess they can.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, it was so frustrating because we saw, like, we would predict what was happening with those guys last night. Like, you could tell. I mean, we even said it on the Boehm at bat, like, just put the ball in the air. And he did, but it was a stupid ass pop up to second base. I mean, that was not what we meant. We meant get the ball to the outfield kind of thing.
And then I said, well, at least it wasn't a double play. And then the next at bat, he hit the 3 hopper to third base.
Right.
All right,
double play. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's the kind of thing. It's like, you know, when a guy's going bad, when you can predict almost to a T exactly what's going to happen in that at bat.
Yeah, you want to see them be better with runners in scoring position in general. They were 2 for 8 in game 2. I know they went off in game 3. They got the job done in game 4, but 3 solo home runs. They had opportunities to break that game open and really separate themselves a few times against Strider. I believe for the night they were 0 for 6 with 9 runners left on base. I'm actually not looking at that right now, but I believe that's what I saw late last night.
There was definitely 9 left on base because I keep that book, right? So, but I didn't check the. I
believe they were 0 for 6, but you know, and hey, one thing I'll say as a finishing thought, one tip of the cap I will give to the Braves is Michael Harris in center field.
Yeah.
That series would have been over before last night if it were not for him. And if they would have gone on to win that game last night, it would have been because of him, because that play that he made on Johan Rojas early on, I believe in the 3rd inning to turn that double play. Was it the 3rd or the second? The 2nd inning, I believe.
2nd inning, yeah.
Just a truly remarkable play. Terrific defensive center fielder. And speaking of terrific defensive center fielders, Johan Rojas, man, like, that game was over. They lose that game if he doesn't track that baseball down. And he took a little bit of a weird route to it, but man, like, the closing speed to go get it at the end. I don't know that anybody else on the roster makes that play. And man, he bailed out Craig Kimbrell last night, big time.
Another great John Middleton comment about Rojas when we were talking, and he said, you know, I was talking to Gary Maddox. I think it was at Alumni Weekend. I think it's when he said it was. I have to go back and listen to the recording. And he said, you know, I told Gary, I said, you were the greatest defensive center fielder I ever watched play the game. He said, but the kid we have now, he says, I don't know if he'll hit like you, but defensively in center field, he might be as good as you were.
Gary's like, yeah, man, I'm just
and apparently John said Maddox was like, after watching him, said, I kind of agree, like how well he plays out there. So I mean, so it's an interesting, like, weird conversation that has nothing to do with the game, but you know, that's what Middleton was sharing, and he was saying, like, you know, I was talking to the best center fielder of my childhood, and you know, John was 17, I guess, when you know, those guys started to come into the league. He talked about that. I think he said he was 17 when Schmidt debuted. So not really childhood, I guess, but you know, young man when those guys were getting into their prominence. And he's, you know, Gary Maddox was his guy defensively in center field, and has not seen one since that plays the position like that. But said Johan Rojas can do it, and that's a heck of a play to, you know, against Acuna. At a time where he doesn't get to that ball, boy, things could have gone off the rails quickly there for the Phillies. That was another moment. You talked about the 9th inning being kind of like, that was an situation, sure. Bases loaded against Acuna, and he did it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I thought it was going to fall. I did. I said, you know?
Yeah.
So, hey, great play. All right, well, listen, we'll be back on Monday before Game 1 of the National League Championship Series at Citizens Bank Park against the Arizona Diamondbacks. How about that? That's not a sentence I thought I'd be saying about a week ago.
That's not a sentence I thought would be said at all this year. Yeah, I mean, really, think about that. I mean, the Diamondbacks and the Phillies in the NLCS. That no one had that one. No one predicted that, and yet here we are.
Here we are. All right. Well, for Anthony Sanfilippo and Bob Wankel, you can follow Anthony on Twitter at AnSanPhilly. You can follow me at Bob_Wankel. Make sure that you're checking out Crossed Up anywhere that you get your shows on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, all that good stuff. Be sure to check out Anthony at crossingbroad.com. I'm also there as well. And you can also subscribe to a free Phillies daily newsletter Monday through Friday in your inbox by, I don't know, we'll say about 10 these days. These shows are jamming me up, Anthony. It's free. You can go to redoctoberphilly.com to subscribe, and we will talk to you next week.